What would you do if your family texted you, on the morning of the trip you paid for, that you were no longer welcome on it? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set my phone down, finished my coffee, and made one phone call that changed everything. Before we go further, if stories about quiet strength and real justice matter to you, hit that subscribe button right now, tap the bell, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and I read every single comment. My name is Marcus Cole. I'm 54 years old, and I own a small custom woodworking shop just outside Nashville, Tennessee. For 19 years, I was married to a woman named Renee. For 19 years, I raised her daughter, Sophie, as my own. I taught her to ride a bike in the church parking lot. I sat through 11 years of piano recitals. I learned to braid hair from a YouTube video because her mother worked nights and somebody had to get her ready for school. I tell you all of this not to earn sympathy, but because you need to understand what 19 years actually looks like before I tell you how it ended. It ended with a text message, sent at 5:50 in the morning, 4 hours before our flight to Rome. The message read, "Change of plans. Sophie wants this trip with Grant. It's her chance to finally know her real father. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Grant was Sophie's biological father. He'd been absent for the better part of 2 decades. He'd resurfaced 8 months earlier, first through a birthday card, then through coffee dates, then through long phone calls that Sophie started taking behind closed doors. I didn't fight it. I actually thought it was healthy for her to know where half of her came from. What I didn't expect was to be erased from a trip I had planned for 14 months and paid nearly $31,000 to make happen. I looked at that message twice. Then I typed back 3 words. "Have a nice trip." And I called my lawyer. I know how that sounds. Cold, maybe. Detached. You might be thinking a man in my position should have shown up at the airport, should have made a scene, should have demanded an explanation face to face. I didn't have that fight left in me. 19 years teaches you when a battle is already over. You just don't always notice the exact moment it ended. For me, that moment was a text message with a period at the end of it, sent before the sun even came up. My suitcase sat by the front door, packed and zipped, next to a folder I hadn't packed yet. That folder held something I hadn't told Renee. For months earlier, a cardiologist in Nashville had sat across from me in a small exam room and told me I had early-stage heart failure. Manageable, he said, if I made real changes. Serious, if I ignored it. I hadn't told my wife. I hadn't told Sophie. I was planning to tell them both in Rome, on a quiet evening, away from the noise of daily life, because I wanted them to hear it from me calmly, not catch me hiding pills in a drawer. That trip wasn't just a vacation. It was supposed to be the moment I finally let my family see me as something other than the man who fixed things. I wanted, just once, for someone to take care of me instead. Instead, I stood in my kitchen at 5:50 in the morning, holding a phone that told me I wasn't needed on that plane, and I understood something about myself that I had somehow avoided understanding for 19 years. I had built an entire life around being useful, and the moment someone more exciting walked through the door, usefulness stopped being enough. I picked up the phone and called Deborah Shaw. She'd handled every legal matter for my business since I opened it. Contracts, permits, one messy dispute with a supplier who tried to shortchange me on a lumber order. She had never once heard me ask what I asked her that morning. "I want to know what's mine," I told her. Not out of anger. I want facts. She told me to slow down, to sleep on it, to not make a decision I'd regret in a week. I told her I'd had years to make this decision, and the text had simply removed my last reason to delay it. Here's something I hadn't said out loud to anyone before that call. I had quietly been thinking about selling the family cabin for over a year. Not the house Renee and I lived in together, that one was jointly owned, and I never once considered touching it unfairly. I'm talking about the lake property 40 minutes outside the city, the one my father built with his own hands in the 70s, the one he left to me alone when he passed, long before Renee and I ever met. When Renee and I refinanced our shared mortgage years earlier, our attorney had drawn up a simple post-nuptial agreement clarifying that the cabin remained separate property. I hadn't done that because I distrusted my wife. I did it because my father always told me a man protects what was given to him before he ever needs to. That cabin was where the family retreat had been planned for years. Every summer, every holiday, every 4th of July. It was the one place that was entirely, legally, unmistakably mine. Deborah asked if I was certain. I told her some part of me had been certain for a long time. The text simply moved the decision out of the maybe someday pile and into the today pile. I opened my banking app while my coffee went cold on the counter. I couldn't undo everything already paid for. The flights were non-refundable, gone the moment I clicked cancel on my own seat. But the villa we'd rented for the second half of the trip, the wine tour I'd booked as an anniversary surprise, the private cooking class, all of it was under my name, tied to my card. I cancelled what I could. I withdrew as guarantor on what I couldn't. Within 20 minutes, I had quietly pulled myself out of every piece of that trip that still belonged to me. My phone lit up almost immediately. Renee's name filled the screen, over and over. I turned it face down and didn't touch it again for the rest of the morning. By the time their plane left the runway, they still believed they had simply swapped one passenger for another. They had no idea they had just lost the man who was holding the entire trip together, and, without either of them noticing yet, the man holding their entire family together too. Renee's texts arrived in waves once they landed to change planes in New York. First soft. Marcus, please, let's talk about this like adults. Then sharp. The villa says our reservation was cancelled. This is humiliating. Humiliating. That was her word. Not confused. Not hurt. Humiliating. Like I had shown up underdressed to an event she was hosting. Sophie's message came an hour later. You didn't have to punish everyone because you're upset. I read that line 3 times, sitting alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt far too quiet. Not once did she ask why I was upset in the first place. Only that my being upset had become an inconvenience for people she cared about more. I answered her only once. You wanted this trip with your real father. Let him carry what's left of it. I never heard back. Before I go on, if you've ever had to make peace with being replaced by someone who did far less than you did, tell me in the comments how you handled it. And if this story is landing with you, smash that like button right now. It tells me you're still with me, and it costs you nothing. I want to tell you about 3 moments, because listing 19 years of small sacrifices would take all night. 3 is enough to show you the shape of what I mean. The first happened when Sophie was 6. She came down with chickenpox during the worst ice storm Nashville had seen in a decade. Renee was working a double shift she couldn't get out of. I stayed up 3 nights straight, dabbing calamine lotion on a little girl who couldn't stop scratching, reading her the same book 4 times because it was the only thing that calmed her down. On the 3rd night, half asleep, she grabbed my thumb and said, "Stay, Daddy." That was the first time she ever called me that, and I still remember exactly where I was standing. The second happened at her high school graduation. I had quietly covered a shortfall on her senior class fees that Renee never even knew about, because Sophie was embarrassed to ask for help and told me not to mention it. Grant showed up that day for the first time in years, bought her an expensive necklace, and somehow ended up in the center of every photograph. When the photographer called for a picture with the parents, Sophie pulled her mother and Grant in close. I stood a few feet back, holding her graduation cap because she'd handed it to me to hold, like I was the person whose job it was to carry things, not the person who belonged in the frame. The third happened just last Father's Day. Sophie posted a long, warm tribute online, tagging Grant, thanking him for finally being in her life. On the kitchen counter that same morning, she'd left me a card. It said, "Thanks for always helping out." Not Dad. Just a man who helps out. I sat with that card a long time before I ever mentioned it to Deborah. When I finally walked into Deborah's office to sign the paperwork, she slid the folder across her desk and looked at me carefully. "This isn't just a statement, Marcus. This is your life changing." I picked up the pen. My hand shook slightly, a small tremor I'd started noticing months earlier and quietly blamed on stress. The signature came out a little crooked. Deborah noticed. She didn't say anything about it, and I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Here's something I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Deborah in that moment. The tremor wasn't stress. It was one of the early symptoms my cardiologist had flagged, tied to a medication adjustment we were still working through. I wasn't hiding my heart condition to be secretive. I was hiding it because I wanted to control how and when my family learned about it. I wanted to tell them with facts in hand, not fear. The plan had been simple. Sit them both down in Rome, away from schedules and static, and explain everything calmly. Show them the treatment plan. Show them I had already looked into what changes we might eventually need to make at home. I had even sketched out a short list of things the cabin might need someday. A ramp instead of the porch steps, handrails along the dock, nothing dramatic, just quiet preparation. What that 5:50 a.m. text message cracked open in me wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. I finally saw that my family had only ever pictured me as the man who takes care of things, never once as a man who might eventually need to be taken care of in return. A few months before all this, Renee had noticed my hand shaking over dinner. She asked if I was sure I wanted to keep running the shop at my age, worried I might get restless without it. She never once asked if something was wrong with my health. She asked about the schedule, about the routine, about whether my slowing down might inconvenience her. I didn't hold it against her at the time. Looking back now, I understand I had been quietly explaining away a lot of small signals for a long time, telling myself they didn't mean what they clearly meant. Then came the moment that really settled things for me. While they were overseas, Renee accidentally left a voice message running during a call with Grant. Probably hit the wrong button. It recorded almost 90 seconds of conversation and landed in my inbox that evening. Her voice came through light, almost amused. He'll calm down. Marcus always does. He likes being needed. Grant asked what would happen if I didn't calm down this time. She laughed. He won't actually leave. He built his whole life around taking care of us. That line did more damage than any insult ever could have, because she wasn't wrong about the man I used to be. She understood me completely. She had simply only ever valued the parts of me she could use. I went back to Deborah's office and signed everything that remained. The cabin sale authorization, the post-nup enforcement, updated beneficiary paperwork, a plan to redirect part of what I had into an apprenticeship fund for young woodworkers, something I'd quietly wanted to do for years but never made time for. My hand shook through every line. This time I didn't try to hide it. Does Renee know about your heart? Deborah asked. No, I said. I was going to tell my family. I'm not sure anymore that I still have one. If you've ever had to protect your peace from people who are supposed to protect you, this next part is for you, and if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now's a good time, because the ending of this story is one you're not going to want to miss. The cabin sale moved fast. I'd already had it appraised over a year earlier when I first started quietly considering downsizing, already had a buyer lined up who'd shown interest before any of this began, already had every document sitting organized in a folder because Deborah likes things organized, and frankly, so do I. That text didn't create a plan out of nothing. It simply ended my hesitation about using a plan I already had sitting ready. I accepted an offer slightly under market value in exchange for a fast, clean closing. 17 days, no repairs required, no strangers wandering through while I stood outside pretending not to watch. 17 days meant everything could be finished quietly before anyone got home from Rome. When the movers came, I want to be clear about one thing. I didn't throw anything away. I didn't touch a single item that wasn't mine. Every piece of Sophie's childhood still stored in that cabin, every photo album, every kitchen item Renee had chosen over the years, all of it went into a climate-controlled storage unit, paid 6 months in advance. What I kept for myself fit into the back of my truck. My father's old hand tools. A photograph of Sophie asleep on my shoulder after that chickenpox week. A rocking chair I'd built the year I opened my shop. My medical file. There was one moment that caught me off guard. I walked into what used to be Sophie's room at the cabin, the one with pencil marks still on the doorframe tracking her height every summer. Age 6. Age 9. Age 13. Next to the last mark, in my handwriting, it read taller than Dad soon. I ran my thumb across it and didn't take a picture. Some things don't need to leave with you to still be real. They just stay where you left them. My neighbor Pete came out while the truck was loading. Renee know about this? He asked, nodding toward it. Her lawyer does, I said. Her inbox does too. Whether she knows depends on whether she bothers to check it. I found a small one-story rental about 30 minutes from town, close enough to my cardiologist that appointments wouldn't eat my whole day, with enough space in the garage for my father's tools and an old canoe I'd been meaning to restore. I changed my main phone number and kept one email open strictly for Deborah. The last thing I did before handing over the cabin keys was leave an envelope on the counter. Not a stunt, not a parting shot. Inside was the storage unit address, copies of every legal document, and enough cash to cover 2 weeks in a hotel. I left them with every notice, every possession, and every real chance to make their own decisions from there. What I stopped leaving them with was me. While I was signing over keys back in Nashville, they were still overseas, and for a few days, from the outside, everything looked exactly like what Sophie always said she wanted. Rooftop dinners, a photo captioned the trip we should have had years ago. I didn't go looking for any of it. Pete sent me one picture before catching himself and apologizing. "Don't send me more," was all I told him, and he didn't. But cracks show up fast once the person quietly holding everything together steps away. Grant, as it turned out, had never actually been the one holding anything together. He avoided the dinner bills when he could. He got irritated when Renee brought up, gently, what their living situation might look like once they landed back home. One night at a restaurant, Sophie brought up a memory from when she was 12, a hospital stay after a bad fall, 3 days of monitors and fluorescent lights. Grant smiled and said he remembered it well. "Which hospital was it?" she asked. He didn't know. She did. I had slept in a plastic chair in that room for 3 nights straight. Renee opened Deborah's email on day 6 of the trip. She called my old number and got nothing. She called Deborah instead, who told her calmly that all communication needed to go through the attorneys from that point forward. She hung up rattled, and tried to hide it from Sophie so it wouldn't ruin what was left of the trip. Grant told her not to worry. "He's bluffing," he said. "Guys like him need to be needed. He'll fold once you're home." That line landed strange on Renee, though she couldn't place why at first. It was almost word for word what she'd said about me in that voicemail, that I'd never really leave, that I'd built my whole life around being needed. Hearing it turned back around and aimed at her seemed to shift something. For the first time, she realized both of them had been looking at me the exact same way, as a man too soft to ever actually walk away. Sophie found out about the cabin by accident, catching sight of paperwork open on her mother's phone. "He sold the cabin because we chose Grant," she said, her voice sharp. "Don't call it that right now," Renee snapped back. Sophie went quiet. I think that was the first time the word dad ever felt heavy in her own mouth, the first time she understood that calling someone that wasn't free. It had weight. It had cost someone something for 19 years, and she was only just beginning to understand who had been paying it. Grant tried to smooth it over. "Your stepfather's trying to control you with money," he told her. Sophie asked him plainly where they were supposed to live now. He had nothing. "We'll figure something out," he said, the kind of answer a man gives when he's never once had to actually figure something out for somebody else. By the last night of the trip, nobody was posting photos anymore. Renee stood out on a balcony, looking at the dark water, slowly understanding that the cabin really might be gone. What she still hadn't figured out yet was that Grant had never intended to become the man she traded me in for. He had only ever intended to be the man who showed up for the easy parts. They flew back into Nashville on a Wednesday afternoon. Grant came along because Sophie asked him to, though he clearly didn't want to be there. The cab turned onto the long gravel road toward the cabin. Sophie noticed first. "Mom, whose car is that?" A different vehicle sat in the driveway. New curtains hung in the windows. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch rail. Renee tried her key. It didn't turn. A man she'd never met stepped out, calm and a little apologetic, and explained he'd purchased the property legally, that closing had already been completed. Renee called the police. When they arrived, they checked the paperwork, confirmed everything was legitimate, and asked her to step off private property that no longer belonged to her. There was no scene of furniture thrown onto the lawn, no locks changed in front of them out of spite. Everything they owned sat safely in that storage unit, paid through the following spring. It made me look prepared, not cruel, and that distinction mattered to me even from a distance. Renee turned to Grant. We can stay with you until this gets sorted. Grant lived in a small one-bedroom apartment. My lease doesn't allow long-term guests, he said, barely hesitating. Not even me. Sophie asked. I didn't say that, he backtracked. I just need some time. Time. The same word he'd been handing Sophie her entire childhood, dressed up in new clothes. The new owner walked out with an envelope. Inside was the storage unit address and enough cash for a hotel stay. Renee read the letter I'd left standing right there in what used to be our driveway, Sophie close beside her. It said something like this. You told me Sophie needed her real father. I hope Grant becomes the man both of you believe he can be. I didn't sell out of spite. I sold a property I inherited, maintained for years, and had already planned to leave, because my health is changing and I needed a simpler life. Your things are safe and paid for. Deborah has every document you need. I spent most of my adult life believing that being dependable would eventually make me family. Your message showed me that in your eyes, I was still a man who could be set aside the moment someone more exciting walked back in. I don't wish either of you harm, but I won't finance a life where I'm treated as optional. Take care of each other. Marcus. Renee stopped on the line about my health changing. She thought back, the shaking hand at dinner, the vague doctor's appointments, the careful way I'd planned that trip. What does he mean about his health? Sophie asked. Renee didn't have an answer. For the first time in 19 years, they were both realizing I'd had an entire inner life they never bothered to ask enough questions to find. Grant tried to shift the blame. This whole thing is manipulation, he said. Sophie turned on him instead, quiet but sharp. What medication is he taking? He didn't know. What doctor does he see? He didn't know that either. What was the name of my elementary school? He couldn't answer that one, and something in Sophie's face changed permanently in that moment. She realized standing there that her biological father hadn't just failed to know me. He barely knew her either. Grant left soon after, citing some work matter that suddenly needed his attention. Renee and Sophie checked into the hotel I'd already paid for. That night, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed holding an old photograph pulled from a storage box, herself at 6 years old, asleep on my shoulder after that ice storm. On the back, in my handwriting, it read, "My girl is finally warm." Sophie broke down. He thought I was his, she said. Renee put a hand on her back. He did. 5 months passed. I used part of the money from the cabin sale to start a small apprenticeship fund at a trade school on the east side of Nashville, for young people learning woodworking and carpentry who couldn't afford the tools or the certification fees. I know exactly what that kind of chance can do for somebody, because I was one of them once, a long time ago. They held a small ceremony in a modest workshop space to mark the first group of students, and I got invited to say a few words about patience, about craftsmanship, about the kind of life you build slowly, out of things that actually last. Renee read about it in a small community newsletter and brought Sophie along. Grant showed up too, mostly because Sophie asked him to. She told him later she wanted to see whether he was capable of showing up for something that wasn't easy or convenient for him. After I finished speaking, Renee walked toward me through the small crowd. She didn't raise her voice. Her tone was low, controlled. You had enough money to fund a scholarship for strangers, but you left your wife and daughter in a hotel. I left you storage, legal notice, and 2 weeks paid in advance, I said. What I stopped giving you was unlimited access to my life. She said I had humiliated them. No, I told her. I stopped hiding the consequences of a decision you made in a text message, out loud, for everyone to see. Sophie stepped closer. Dad, she said. I didn't turn cold, but I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I loved hearing you call me that when you were 6, I said. Her eyes filled. I was stupid, she said. You were old enough to choose, I told her. That means you're old enough to understand what the choice cost. She asked if I would come back, not to the marriage, just back into their lives, back to something like normal. I loved you like my own daughter for 19 years, I said. But loving you doesn't require me to keep accepting whatever place you decide to give me. That's when Grant stepped in, like he had any right to. This has gone far enough. Sophie has 2 fathers. I wasn't interested in arguing biology with him. I just asked what she'd studied in college. Wrong answer. I asked what she was allergic to. Nothing. Sophie looked at him steady now. Marcus had problems too, she said quietly. He still came. That was really the moment it settled. Not some dramatic reveal, no scandal, just a plain, quiet fact sitting out in the open where everyone could finally see it. Grant had a title. I had a history. A title doesn't hold up a family by itself. Sophie asked about my health, gently this time, like she actually wanted to know instead of needing something from me. I told her the truth. Early-stage heart failure, manageable for now, treatment already underway, lifestyle changes I was actually sticking to for once. Renee's response came fast. Then let us help you. You don't get to become my caregivers because you feel guilty, I said. I didn't shut the door completely, though. I gave Sophie a P.O. box address, not my home. Write to me, I told her. Don't ask for money. Don't ask me to fix anything. Just tell me who you are when you need nothing from me. She nodded, tears running, and I turned back toward the students waiting to take pictures with the man who'd helped fund their tools. A year has gone by now. I'm still living in that small rental 30 minutes outside Nashville. Life there isn't perfect. Some mornings my hand shakes worse than others. Some days the medication leaves me tired and slow. I've had to learn, the hard way, how to actually accept help instead of only giving it. There are evenings when the quiet in that house gets loud enough to ache. But it's a different kind of quiet than I expected. It doesn't feel like loneliness anymore. It feels more like room to breathe. These days, I go to cardiac rehab twice a week. I mentor a handful of the trade school students. Nothing formal, just coffee and honest conversation about tools, work, and life. Pete and I still fish together most weekends, same as always. I still tinker in my garage, fixing things that don't really need fixing, just because my hands like the work. I've learned to build my schedule around what my body can actually handle, instead of everybody else's needs. I'm not a healthier man than I was a year ago, and I'm certainly not a richer one. But I stopped being afraid that love had to be earned through usefulness. That alone is worth more than either of those things. Renee moved into a small apartment across town and picked up more hours at her job. She's not struggling exactly, but for the first time in a long while, she's had to build her own budget, pay her own bills, call her own repairman when something breaks. Not every problem in her life has a Marcus attached to it anymore. She sent me a letter a few months back. No demands, no request to get back together, just a plain, honest apology. I wrote back and told her I forgave her. I also told her clearly that the marriage was over. Both things were true at the same time, and I've come to believe they usually are. Grant drifted out of Sophie's life again once she stopped looking at him like something out of a dream. This time, she didn't chase after him. She told me once that wanting to know her biological father was never the mistake. The mistake was treating a man who had shown up every single day for 19 years like something she could trade away the moment a more interesting offer walked through the door. Sophie writes to me regularly now. The early letters were full of apology, and I answered those politely, nothing more. Eventually, she stopped writing about the past and started telling me about her actual life instead. Her job, a class she was taking, some volunteer hours at the trade school, the small ways she was trying to be a more thoughtful person day to day. After several months of that, I agreed to meet her for coffee. She didn't call me Dad right away. She just said, "Thank you for meeting me, Marcus." "Thank you for coming without asking me to fix anything," I told her. It wasn't a movie reunion. It was just a small, honest start. Back home that evening, I opened my father's old toolbox, the one I've carried from house to house my whole adult life. The photograph of Sophie at 6 was still tucked inside, a little worn at the corners now. I didn't throw it away. I never will. Forgiving someone doesn't mean pretending the love you had for them wasn't real. But I didn't put it back on my nightstand either. It stayed right there in the box, alongside the other things that belong to a life I've already lived through once. For most of my life, I believed love meant staying, no matter how little of yourself was left by the end of the day. I know better now. Sometimes love means walking away before resentment turns you into somebody you don't recognize in the mirror anymore. They thought I disappeared to punish them. The truth is simpler than that. I disappeared because for the first time in 19 years, I finally understood that my life belonged to me too. Forgiveness opened the door back up. Boundaries are what decide how far it's allowed to swing. If you've ever had to step away from someone you love just to hold on to your own sense of self, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what that taught you, because stories like yours are exactly why I keep making these. And if you made it all the way here with me, do one last thing before you go. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because there's always another story worth telling. Take care of yourself out there.